My name is Amanda Miller, and I'm 34 years old. For 7 years, I believed I had the perfect marriage with Brian. Living our suburban dream in Boston while I climbed the corporate ladder as a marketing executive. Brian always complained about the stress of his investment banking job. So when he suddenly announced he needed a detox solo camping trip, I tried to be supportive. But something felt off when he packed cologne and button-down shirts instead of typical camping gear. Little did I know, that strange packing choice was just the first clue to the betrayal I was about to uncover. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're from and hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how I turn this heartbreak into the most satisfying revenge. Brian and I met at our mutual friend Taylor's wedding 9 years ago. I wasn't even supposed to attend that night since I had just gone through a bad breakup with my college boyfriend. But Taylor insisted I come to take my mind off things. I remember standing by the bar nursing a glass of champagne when Brian approached me with the most genuine smile I'd ever seen. He had these captivating blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, and within minutes, we were deep in conversation as if we'd known each other for years. "You're the only person here who doesn't look like they're having the time of their life," he had said, handing me another glass of champagne. "Is it that obvious?" I had replied with a small laugh. "Only to someone who's been watching you for the past 20 minutes trying to work up the courage to come talk to you." His honesty was refreshing. And by the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers. Our first date was the very next weekend at a small Italian restaurant downtown where we talked until the staff started stacking chairs around us. Brian was different from any man I'd ever dated, attentive, ambitious, and so certain about what he wanted in life. After just 3 months of dating, he gave me a key to his apartment. And 5 months after that, he proposed during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. The proposal was everything I'd dreamed of, a sunset walk on the beach. Him down on one knee with a vintage diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I said yes without hesitation, and 8 months later, we were married at a breathtaking vineyard in Napa Valley. The ceremony was intimate, with just 50 of our closest friends and family. I wore a simple white silk dress that my mother helped me choose, and Brian cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. It was perfect. The first few years of our marriage were filled with adventure. We traveled whenever we could, weekend trips to Montreal, a 2-week vacation exploring Italy, and even a spontaneous road trip down the California coast. We both threw ourselves into our careers too. I was working my way up at a marketing firm, and Brian was making a name for himself at Boston Financial Partners. We supported each other's ambitions and celebrated every promotion, every raise, every small victory. When Brian got a significant promotion 3 years into our marriage, we decided it was time to buy our first home. We found a beautiful colonial-style house in a quiet Boston suburb with a yard big enough for the children we thought we'd have someday. The house needed some work, but we spent weekends painting walls, refinishing hardwood floors, and turning that house into our home. Those were some of my favorite memories, Brian with paint in his hair, me accidentally breaking a window trying to install curtain rods, and both of us collapsing in laughter on our new living room floor. Around our 4th anniversary, we had the conversation about starting a family. Brian was on track to make partner at his firm, and I had just been promoted to senior marketing director. We both agreed to wait a bit longer, to focus on our careers for a few more years before having children. In retrospect, I wonder if having a child would have changed anything, if it would have kept Brian faithful. But I try not to dwell on those thoughts now. It was around our 5th anniversary that I first noticed subtle changes in Brian. He started working later hours, coming home exhausted and distracted. I attributed it to his growing responsibilities at work and tried to be understanding. When he missed our anniversary dinner because of a client emergency, I was disappointed but rescheduled for the following weekend. I wanted to be the supportive wife who understood the demands of his career. Our friends Jessica and Kyle noticed the changes in Brian before I allowed myself to acknowledge them. Jessica has been my best friend since college, and the 4 of us often spent weekends together, grilling in our backyard or trying new restaurants in the city. 6 months ago, during a dinner at their house, Jessica pulled me aside. Is everything okay with you and Brian? She asked carefully. Of course, I responded automatically. Why? I don't know. He seems distant. Cole tried to talk to him about their planned fishing trip next month, and Brian barely seemed interested. I brushed off her concerns, making excuses about Brian's workload. But her words planted a seed of worry that I couldn't quite shake. The last truly perfect moment I remember was our vacation to Maui 6 months ago. It was a last-minute trip Brian had suggested, which surprised me given his busy schedule. For 7 days, we had the Brian I had fallen in love with back, attentive, affectionate, present. We went snorkeling, hiked to waterfalls, and spent evenings watching the sunset on our private balcony. On our last night there, Brian held my hand across the dinner table and told me how lucky he was to have me in his life. To many more years of happiness, he had toasted, clinking his glass against mine. I had no way of knowing that within months, those words would feel like the cruelest lie. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when things began to change between us, though at the time I made every excuse not to see it. About 4 months after our Maui trip, Brian's behavior shifted in ways that were subtle at first, but became increasingly difficult to ignore. The late nights at work became more frequent. Instead of coming home by 7 or 8, it would often be 11 or midnight before I heard his key in the door. When I expressed concern, he would blame it on a big merger his firm was handling or important clients who were considering significant investments. I wanted to believe him, but something in his explanations felt rehearsed. The Harrison account is just consuming all my time right now, he would say, loosening his tie and avoiding eye contact. Their Asian markets are in different time zones, so we have to schedule calls at odd hours. I tried to be understanding. His job was demanding, and I knew how important his career was to him. I would leave dinner in the microwave and try not to feel hurt when he would barely touch it, claiming he'd already eaten at the office. I stopped waiting up for him most nights, falling asleep alone in our king-sized bed that suddenly felt too big. Then came the changes in his personal habits. Brian had always been somewhat predictable in his routines. He used the same cologne I had given him for our first Christmas together, wore mostly blues and grays, and had the same haircut for as long as I'd known him. But suddenly, he was experimenting with a new cologne that smelled of sandalwood and citrus, something much more expensive than what he used to wear. His wardrobe expanded to include designer shirts I didn't recognize, and he started getting his hair cut every 2 weeks instead of his usual monthly trim. When I complimented his new cologne one morning, hoping to spark conversation, his reaction was telling. "Oh, this? It was a free sample at the department store," he said quickly, too quickly. "Do you like it?" "It's nice," I replied. "Different." He changed the subject immediately, asking if I'd seen his blue tie, the one with small white dots. I knew exactly which one he meant. It was the tie I'd bought him for his last birthday, the one he rarely wore because he said it was too special for every day. I found it strange that he wanted to wear it on a random Tuesday. Perhaps the most alarming change was his sudden protectiveness over his phone. Brian had never been particularly attached to his devices before, often leaving his phone on the coffee table or kitchen counter without a second thought. Now, his phone was always on his person, and when he did set it down, it was always face down. He added a new password that he didn't share with me, though we had always known each other's phone passwords before. The first time I noticed this change was when his phone chimed while he was in the shower. Out of habit, I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a work email notification. Instead, I saw the preview of a text message from someone named Natalie S., with the words, "Can't wait to see you," before it cut off. When I mentioned the text to Brian, his face flushed. "That's just my new secretary," he explained, too casually. "Natalie Stevens. She's probably confirming our meeting tomorrow." It was around this time that Natalie's name began appearing in Brian's conversations with increasing frequency. Natalie had organized an important client file. Natalie had found a mistake in the quarterly projections that saved the team from embarrassment. Natalie had suggested a new restaurant for client lunches that everyone loved. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach each time he mentioned her. My suspicions grew after Brian's company holiday party in December. I had been looking forward to it, having bought a new black dress for the occasion. It was the first company event I'd attended with Brian in months, as he had been attending most work functions alone, claiming they were boring. Internal affairs. That night, I noticed how Brian seemed to avoid a particular corner of the room where a tall, elegant blonde woman stood chatting with colleagues. Later, I overheard someone call her Natalie, and the knot in my stomach tightened when she glanced our way during dinner. The brief look that passed between her and Brian was charged with something I couldn't quite name but recognized instinctively. In a desperate attempt to reconnect, I tried to revitalize our marriage. I planned surprise date nights, booking tables at restaurants we had enjoyed during our early years together. I suggested weekend getaways to places with special meaning to us, like the B&B in Vermont where we had spent our first anniversary. I even tried spicing up our physical relationship, buying new lingerie and planning romantic evenings at home. Brian went through the motions during these efforts, but his heart wasn't in it. During a weekend trip to Vermont, he spent most of the time on his phone, claiming it was an urgent work situation. Our physical intimacy had dwindled to almost nothing, with Brian often claiming he was too tired or had an early morning meeting the next day. The incident that should have been my final wake-up call happened about a month before the camping trip. I was doing laundry when I found a receipt in Brian's suit pocket from La Voile, an expensive French restaurant downtown. The date on the receipt was from a Tuesday night when Brian had told me he was working late on the Peterson account. The receipt showed dinner for two, including a $200 bottle of champagne. When I confronted him, Brian claimed it was a client dinner that had been scheduled at the last minute. "Why didn't you tell me about it?" I asked. "It slipped my mind," he replied, taking the receipt from my hand and crumpling it before tossing it in the trash. "It was just business, Amanda. Nothing worth mentioning." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. It was a Wednesday evening in early May when Brian dropped his bombshell about needing a detox camping trip. I had prepared his favorite meal, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, and that quinoa salad he always claimed to love. I'd even opened a bottle of the Pinot Noir we'd brought back from our Napa Valley honeymoon. I was trying, perhaps too hard in retrospect, to create a moment of connection between us. Brian came home earlier than usual that night, around 7:30, which surprised me. He seemed unusually energetic, almost jittery, as he hung up his coat and joined me in the kitchen. He kissed my cheek briefly, the kind of perfunctory kiss that had replaced our once passionate greetings. "Something smells good," he said, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. "Your favorite," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together since you've been so busy lately." A flicker of something, guilt? Anxiety? Crossed his face before he composed himself. "That's really thoughtful, Amanda." We sat down to eat, and for a few minutes, there was only the sound of cutlery against plates. I asked about his day, and he gave me vague answers about meetings and conference calls. Then, with a deliberate clearing of his throat, he set down his fork. "I've been thinking," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "This merger has been really taking a toll on me. The stress, the constant pressure. I think I need some time to decompress." I've been saying that for months. I agreed, hopeful that he was finally acknowledging the strain his job was putting on him, on us. "Maybe we could plan a weekend away? Go back to Cape Cod?" Brian shook his head, still not looking directly at me. I was thinking of something more solitary. A chance to really disconnect. My stomach tightened as he continued. "I'm thinking of taking a week off for a solo camping trip. Just me, nature, no phones, no internet. A complete detox from work and technology." I tried to process what he was saying. Brian had never been particularly outdoorsy. Our idea of camping was a luxury cabin with running water and electricity. The one time we'd gone actual tent camping early in our relationship, he'd complained about the lack of proper showering facilities and insisted we leave a day early. "Camping?" I repeated, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. "Since when are you into camping?" "Mark from the office has been talking about how therapeutic it is," Brian explained quickly. "He goes every few months to this place in the mountains. says it completely resets him mentally. Mark was a colleague Brian rarely mentioned and certainly not someone whose lifestyle choices he'd ever shown interest in emulating before. Which mountains exactly? I asked. Just the mountains, he replied vaguely, taking a large sip of wine. Somewhere in New Hampshire or Vermont. Mark gave me some recommendations. The conversation continued with Brian elaborating on his elaborate justification. He talked about work stress reaching unsustainable levels, about needing mental clarity, about how a week unplugged from technology would help him refocus on what really mattered. The entire time he spoke, his eyes darted around the room, never settling on me for more than a few seconds. I think this would be good for us too, he added, as if sensing my growing suspicion. For me to come back refreshed and more present. When are you thinking of going? I asked, pushing my half-eaten salmon around my plate. Next week, he replied, a bit too quickly. I've already cleared it with the office. I'll leave Monday morning and be back Sunday night. A week. He had already arranged an entire week away without discussing it with me first. The realization stung more than I wanted to admit. I could come with you, I suggested, watching his reaction carefully. I have some vacation days saved up. It could be good for both of us to disconnect. The flash of panic that crossed Brian's face confirmed my worst fears. He scrambled to find reasons why that wouldn't work. I wouldn't enjoy the primitive conditions. He needed complete solitude to properly detox. The particular campsite he had in mind only allowed single occupancy. Each excuse was more implausible than the last. I really need to do this alone, Amanda, he finally said, with a firmness that ended the discussion. That weekend, I watched Brian pack for his camping trip with growing disbelief. Instead of the practical outdoor gear one would expect, he carefully folded several button-down shirts, a pair of designer jeans, and even dress shoes into a suitcase. He packed his expensive cologne, hair products, and the watch I had given him for our 5th anniversary, hardly essential items for roughing it in the wilderness. When I pointed out the strangeness of his packing choices, he brushed off my concerns. The campsite has shower facilities, he explained unconvincingly. And there's a small town nearby where people go for dinner sometimes. I don't want to look like a complete wilderness hermit if I decide to get a proper meal one night. The morning of his departure, our goodbye was awkward and strained. Brian seemed eager to leave, checking his watch repeatedly as he loaded his suitcase into the trunk of his car. Not a camping backpack or a tent in sight, I noted. You have the number of the campsite office, right? I asked, knowing full well he hadn't provided me with any specific information about where he would be staying. Reception is really spotty up there, he replied, avoiding the question. I'll try to text when I can, but don't worry if you don't hear from me for a few days. He gave me a quick, mechanical hug and a peck on the cheek before getting into his car. As he drove away, I stood in our driveway feeling completely hollow. Once back inside, I tried to track his location using the phone-finding app we had set up years ago in case of emergencies. As expected, his location services had been turned off. That first day alone in our house felt interminable. I wandered from room to room, picking up framed photos of our happier days, wondering when exactly things had started to unravel. I vacillated between giving Brian the benefit of the doubt and acknowledging the mountain of evidence suggesting he was lying to me. By nightfall, I had received a single text from him. Made it to the campsite. Signal weak. Talk soon. I stared at those 9 words for hours, trying to decipher some hidden meaning, some clue to the truth. But deep down, I already knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself yet. 3 days into Brian's supposed wilderness adventure, I had received only 2 brief texts. The first, as I mentioned, simply stated he had arrived at the campsite. The second, sent late the following evening, read, "Hiking is amazing. Sleeping under stars. Miss you." Neither message sounded like Brian, who typically wrote incomplete sentences and would never voluntarily sleep outdoors if a comfortable bed was an option. On the 3rd morning, I was sitting at our kitchen island, absently stirring a cup of coffee that had long gone cold when my phone rang. It was Jessica, calling for our regular Wednesday coffee meetup that I had completely forgotten about. "You still up for Bella's coffee at 11? she asked cheerfully. I almost declined, preferring to wallow in my suspicions alone, but then decided that getting out of the house might actually do me good. Sure, I replied, forcing brightness into my voice. See you there. Bella's Coffee was our weekly ritual, a charming little cafe halfway between Jessica's dental practice and my office. Since Brian was away and I had taken a few days off work, I arrived early and secured our usual table by the window. When Jessica walked in 20 minutes later, I immediately sensed something was off. She hugged me a bit too tightly, her smile a bit too sympathetic. How are you holding up with Brian away? She asked carefully as she sat down. Fine, I replied, stirring my second cup of coffee. It's only been a few days. Jessica nodded, a strange tension in her posture. Throughout our conversation, she kept checking her phone, typing rapid responses to messages, then placing it face down on the table. She asked me questions about work and a home renovation project I'd been planning, but her mind seemed elsewhere. When I inquired about Kyle and their upcoming anniversary plans, she gave distracted answers. Finally, after nearly an hour of this unusual behavior, I called her out on it. Jessica, what's going on? You've barely been present this entire time. She bit her lip, a habit from childhood that emerged when she was deeply uncomfortable. Amanda, I've been debating whether to show you something all morning. My heart began to race. Show me what? With visible reluctance, Jessica picked up her phone, tapped the screen a few times, then handed it to me. Tara Morgan showed me this last night. I think you need to see it. Tara was a peripheral friend, someone we knew from college who had moved to Boston around the same time we had. She worked at a competing financial firm to Brian's and occasionally attended the same industry events. I looked down at Jessica's phone to see Facebook open to Natalie Stevens' profile. The most recent post, dated yesterday, showed a series of photos taken at a stunning beach resort. The caption read, "Paradise found in Punta Cana. Best vacation ever. #blessed Dominican Republic." My hands trembling, I swiped through the photos. The first few showed typical vacation scenes, pristine beaches, elaborate tropical drinks garnished with fruit, a luxurious hotel suite with an ocean view. Then I came to the fourth photo and my entire world collapsed. There was Brian, my husband, lounging on a beach chair, shirtless, with a fruity cocktail in hand. Beside him, a stunning blonde woman in a red bikini leaned against his shoulder, both of them laughing at something off-camera. The woman's perfectly manicured hand rested possessively on his chest. I swiped again. The next photo showed them at a candlelit dinner, Brian wearing one of the button-down shirts he had packed for camping. They were toasting with champagne glasses, the sunset creating a romantic backdrop that twisted the knife even deeper in my heart. Another swipe. This time, a selfie of them together on what appeared to be a boat excursion. Brian's arm wrapped around Natalie's waist, her lips pressed against his cheek. The coffee shop around me faded away as I continued scrolling through irrefutable evidence of my husband's betrayal. The last photo in the series was the most devastating. Brian and Natalie kissing on the beach at sunset, the kind of passionate kiss that leaves no room for misinterpretation. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the phone, but I became aware of Jessica gently placing her hand over mine. Amanda? Say something, please. I looked up at her, feeling strangely detached from my body, as if I were floating somewhere above the scene. He told me he was going camping, I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. To detox from work stress. I know, Jessica said softly. I'm so sorry. They're in Punta Cana, I continued, stating the obvious. He's in the Dominican Republic with his secretary. The reality of the situation came crashing down on me all at once. The room started spinning, and I felt physically ill. I barely made it to the cafe's bathroom before emptying the contents of my stomach. Leaning against the cool tile wall afterward, I felt the first hot tears roll down my cheeks. They quickly gave way to heaving sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of me. Jessica knocked gently on the door. Amanda? Let me in, please. I unlocked the door, and she immediately wrapped me in a tight hug, letting me cry against her shoulder. 7 years, I managed between sobs. 7 years of marriage, and he's throwing it away for her. He's an idiot, Jessica said firmly. An absolute idiot who doesn't deserve you. We stayed in that bathroom for what felt like hours, Jessica holding me while I cycled through tears, disbelief, and the first flickers of rage. The cafe owner, a kind older woman who knew us as regulars, knocked gently to check if we needed anything. "Take all the time you need, dears," she said through the door. "I've put fresh coffee and some pastries aside for you when you're ready." Eventually, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, my makeup completely ruined. But beneath the devastation, I could see something else emerging: determination. "I need to get my hands on his financial records," I said suddenly. "I need to know how long this has been going on." Jessica nodded, her expression shifting from sympathy to solidarity. "We'll figure this out. And Amanda? We're going to make him regret this for the rest of his life." As we left the cafe, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, focused anger. Brian thought he could humiliate me like this and get away with it. He thought I was too naive, too trusting to discover his betrayal. He had severely underestimated me. And that was going to be his biggest mistake. The drive home from the cafe passed in a blur. Jessica insisted on coming with me, concerned about my state of mind, and I was grateful for her presence. My hands shook as I unlocked our front door, the home that Brian and I had chosen together, renovated together, that now felt like a museum of lies. "First things first," Jessica said, slipping into problem-solving mode as we entered the house. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. How long has this been going on, and what resources do you have access to?" Her practical approach gave me something to focus on beyond the searing pain of betrayal. I nodded and headed straight for Brian's home office. For years, we had maintained a relatively transparent approach to our finances. We had separate accounts for our individual spending, but shared accounts for household expenses and savings. Brian handled most of the bills and financial planning, something I had been grateful for in the past, but now recognized as a strategic error on my part. I booted up his desktop computer, relieved that I still knew his password, our wedding date followed by my birth year, ironically enough. Jessica stood beside me, a steady presence as I began my investigation. The first red flag appeared in our joint checking account. Over the past 6 months, there had been regular transfers to a personal account I didn't recognize. Each transfer was labeled vaguely as investment fund or retirement planning. The amounts varied from $1,000 to $3,000 each month, significant sums that I had never questioned because I trusted Brian to manage our investments. "Look at the dates," Jessica pointed out. "The transfers increased right around when you said he started working late more often." Next, I checked our credit card statements. Brian and I shared 2 major credit cards for household expenses and travel. The statements for the past year showed a pattern of suspicious charges: dinners at high-end restaurants on nights Brian claimed to be working late, hotel charges in Boston itself for those client emergencies that kept him out all night, and various gifts from jewelry stores and boutiques that had never made their way to me. But the most damning evidence came when I searched through his email. In a folder labeled Personal Investments, I found confirmation of a separate credit card I knew nothing about. The statements revealed the true extent of his deception: flights to New York for weekend trips I knew nothing about, charges at exclusive restaurants and hotels, and finally, the coup de grace: the receipt for a luxury vacation package to Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, purchased 3 months ago. $2,000 a night for that resort, Jessica whispered, looking over my shoulder at the invoice. For a camping trip. Unbelievable. The email trail also revealed exchanges between Brian and Natalie dating back nearly a year. What had started as seemingly professional correspondence had evolved into intimate messages filled with inside jokes, plans for secret meetings, and eventually explicit declarations of feelings. It was clear that this wasn't just a physical affair. Brian had developed a significant emotional attachment to Natalie. I sat back in the chair, oddly calm as the full picture came into focus. They've been seeing each other for at least 8 months, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Almost a third of our marriage. Jessica squeezed my shoulder. What do you want to do? The answer came to me with surprising clarity. I want to speak with a lawyer. Today. Jessica made a quick call to her cousin Diane, a family law attorney who agreed to see me that afternoon. While waiting for the appointment, I continued my investigation, taking screenshots of incriminating emails and downloading financial statements. I was building a case, meticulously documenting every betrayal. By the time I sat across from Diane in her downtown office 3 hours later, I had a comprehensive file of evidence. Diane reviewed it with professional detachment, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. You've done impressive work here, Amanda, she said finally. This gives us a very strong position. What are my options? I asked. Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, Diane explained. But evidence of financial deception and misuse of marital assets can significantly impact the division of property. Based on what you've shown me, Brian has spent at least $35,000 of joint funds on this affair. She outlined the legal process, the timeline, and what I could reasonably expect in terms of settlement. But when she asked what I wanted from the divorce, my answer surprised even me. I want him to lose everything that matters to him, I said calmly. Not just me, but his reputation. His standing at work, his carefully constructed image. He's humiliated me in the most public way possible. I want him to experience the same. Diane raised an eyebrow but didn't judge. Let's focus on protecting your interests first. Anything beyond that is extracurricular. By the time I left Diane's office, I had initiated divorce proceedings and had a clear understanding of my legal position. But I knew the law would only take me so far. For true justice, I needed to be more creative. That evening, back at home with Jessica still by my side, I developed my multi-phase revenge plan. First, I contacted our bank and transferred my portion of our joint funds to a new account in my name only, leaving exactly half of our savings in the joint account. I was angry, but I wasn't going to stoop to financial misconduct. Next, I called Brian's parents, with whom I had always had a good relationship. This was perhaps the hardest call, but I felt they deserved to know the truth from me rather than hearing a sanitized version from Brian later. Amanda, dear, what a lovely surprise, Margaret, Brian's mother, answered warmly. How's the camping trip going? Is Brian enjoying his time in nature? The irony would have been comical if it weren't so painful. I took a deep breath and shared what I had discovered, including showing her the Facebook photos via video call. Margaret's shock and subsequent anger confirmed what I had always suspected, that she had raised her son with better values than he was currently displaying. I'm so sorry, Amanda, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what's gotten into him. His father and we're just so disappointed. I'm not calling to turn you against him, I assured her. Though part of me certainly wanted Brian to face his parents' disapproval. I just wanted you to hear it from me before things changed significantly between us. After speaking with his parents, I made several more strategic calls. First to a locksmith, who agreed to come first thing the following morning to change all the locks on the house. Then to a security company to update the codes on our home security system. Next to a moving company that specialized in short-notice jobs, booking them for Saturday to move Brian's possessions into a storage unit. The most satisfying call was to Philip Harrington, the managing partner at Brian's firm. I had met Philip several times at company functions and knew him to be a strict traditionalist when it came to the firm's image. I requested a brief meeting the following day, citing a personal matter concerning Brian that may have professional implications. Jessica watched me make these calls with a mixture of awe and concern. Are you sure about all this? She asked when I finally set my phone down. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied. He betrayed every promise he ever made to me. He lied to my face for months. He's spending our money we worked for together, to romance his secretary in the Caribbean while telling me he's sleeping in a tent somewhere. And the worst part? He thought I was too stupid to figure it out. I picked up my phone one last time that evening, scrolling through Natalie's public Facebook album again. In one of the photos, barely visible in the background, was a receipt on their dinner table. I zoomed in and, with a bit of digital enhancement, could make out the company credit card Brian had used to pay for their romantic dinner. It was the final piece of evidence I needed for my meeting with Philip. Tomorrow, I told Jessica as she prepared to leave, is when Brian's perfect life starts to unravel. And he won't even see it coming until he's lost everything. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The initial shock and pain had crystallized into a cold, clear determination. I showered, dressed in one of my most professional outfits, a charcoal gray suit that Brian had always said made me look formidable, and prepared to set my plan in motion. The locksmith arrived promptly at 8, a burly man named Frank who didn't ask questions when I requested all exterior locks be changed. Within 2 hours, new deadbolts secured every entrance to the house, and I had the only keys. I tipped Frank generously for his efficiency and discretion. Next came the security technician, who reprogrammed our home system with new codes and removed Brian's remote access. I also had him install 2 discrete cameras, one at the front door and one at the back, that would send footage directly to my phone. I wanted to capture Brian's reaction when he returned to find himself locked out of his own home. By noon, I was seated across from Philip Harrington in his corner office with its impressive view of the Boston skyline. Philip had always been cordial to me at company events, but today his expression was concerned as I placed a folder on his desk. "Amanda, you mentioned this was a personal matter concerning Brian. Is everything all right?" "No, Philip. Everything is not all right," I replied calmly. "I've recently discovered that Brian has been engaged in behavior that I believe conflicts with the firm's ethical standards and potentially misuses company resources." Philip's brow furrowed as I opened the folder and methodically presented my evidence, screenshots of Brian's emails arranging trysts during work hours, photos from Natalie's Facebook showing them together in Punta Cana, and most damning of all, the enhanced image of the company credit card receipt. "Brian told me he was on a solo camping trip for mental health reasons," I explained. "He requested and received time off from the firm under false pretenses. He's currently at a 5-star resort in the Dominican Republic with Natalie Stevens from your accounting department, and it appears he's been charging at least some of these expenses to the company." Philip's expression darkened as he examined the evidence. Boston Financial Partners prided itself on its conservative image and ethical standards. An affair between an investment banker and a secretary was scandalous enough. Misuse of company funds and fraudulent time-off requests made it a potentially fireable offense. "I want to be clear," I added. "I'm not here out of spite. As a significant client myself, I believe the firm should be aware of potential ethical violations. What actions you take are, of course, entirely up to you." It was a masterful performance, positioning myself as the reasonable party concerned with professional ethics rather than a scorned wife seeking revenge. Philip assured me the matter would be investigated thoroughly and thanked me for bringing it to his attention. "I'm very sorry you're going through this, Amanda," he said as I gathered my documents. "Brian has always spoken so highly of you." "Yes," I replied with a sad smile. "He's quite good at saying one thing and doing another." From Brian's office, I went directly to the storage facility I had arranged. I paid for 3 months in advance for a medium-sized unit, ensuring it would be climate-controlled to protect Brian's precious designer suits and expensive electronics. I wasn't looking to destroy his possessions, just to remove them from what would soon be solely my home. The moving company arrived at our house at 2 o'clock. 3 efficient men followed my instructions to pack Brian's clothing, personal items, and the furniture I had designated as his. The leather recliner he had insisted on buying despite it clashing with our decor, the expensive gaming system he rarely had time to use, and the antique desk that had belonged to his grandfather. I directed them to leave my belongings and our shared items untouched. By 6 that evening, the storage unit contained everything Brian would need to start his new life, everything except his dignity and the home he had taken for granted. I placed the storage unit key and a copy of the divorce papers in a manila envelope, which I hand-delivered to Brian's assistant Linda at the office. Linda had always been kind to me and seemed genuinely distressed by my request. "Could you please put this on Brian's desk on Monday morning?" I asked. "It's important he receives it as soon as he returns." "Of course, Amanda," she replied, her eyes full of questions she was too professional to ask. "Is there anything else I can do?" "Just tell him I said enjoy the rest of his camping trip," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The next phase of my plan involved social media. The very platform that had exposed Brian's betrayal would now broadcast the consequences. I logged into our shared social media accounts, changed the passwords, and posted a simple update. After discovering my husband's infidelity during his fake camping trip, actually a Caribbean vacation with his secretary, I'm embracing this new chapter of my life. Sometimes losing a cheater is actually finding yourself. #fresh start, #new beginnings. I attached a photo of myself, smiling, holding up the new house keys, with the moving truck visible in the background. Within minutes, comments and messages began flooding in, expressions of shock, support, and, of course, requests for details. I ignored them all. The announcement wasn't for attention or sympathy, it was to ensure Brian couldn't control the narrative when he returned. Next, I forwarded selected screenshots of Brian's emails with Natalie to a carefully curated list, his closest friends, his mentor from business school, and the partners at his firm who hadn't been in my meeting with Philip. I included only the most damning exchanges, the ones where Brian disparaged our marriage or made promises to Natalie about their future together. Each email was accompanied by a brief, dignified note. "I thought you should be aware of who Brian really is. I valued our relationship and wanted you to hear this from me directly." With the public and professional aspects of my revenge in place, I turned to the personal. I booked myself a 2-week vacation to Hawaii, departing the day before Brian was scheduled to return. I had always wanted to visit the islands, but Brian had repeatedly postponed such trips, claiming work obligations. Now I would experience that paradise while he dealt with the ruins of the life he had destroyed. Finally, I contacted a real estate agent recommended by Diane, my lawyer. The house market in our neighborhood was strong, and the agent was confident we could list the property quickly. I signed the necessary paperwork to initiate the selling process, knowing that Brian would be served with notification after the divorce filing. As night fell on what had been the most productive day of my life, I sat alone in our half-empty house with a glass of wine. The spaces where Brian's belongings had been removed created a visual representation of the void in my life, but strangely, I didn't feel empty. I felt lighter, as if I had shed a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I replied honestly. "It's done. All of it." "You're the strongest person I know," she texted back. "Kyle and I are here if you need anything." "Anything at all." I smiled at her message, grateful for true friends who stood by me when it mattered most. Tomorrow, I would pack for Hawaii, tie up any loose ends, and prepare to leave this chapter of my life behind. Brian would return to find his carefully constructed world dismantled, his reputation in tatters, his home inaccessible, and his wife gone. The revenge wasn't about hurting Brian as deeply as he had hurt me. No, it was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my future. It was about ensuring that every time he looked in the mirror, he would see not just his own reflection, but the consequences of his actions. As I finished my wine, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would be okay. Better than okay. I would thrive. The calls started coming 36 hours before Brian was due to return from his camping trip. I was in the middle of packing for Hawaii when my phone lit up with his name. I watched it ring without answering. 2 minutes later, he called again. And again. And again. After the 6th call, I received a text. "Amanda, please pick up. We need to talk." I continued folding my summer dresses into my suitcase, a small smile playing on my lips. Brian must have received an urgent message from someone, perhaps his parents, or maybe one of the firm's partners had reached him about the investigation. Either way, his carefully planned fantasy vacation was crumbling. When the phone rang for the 10th time, I finally answered. Hello, Brian, I said calmly. How's camping? There was a moment of stunned silence before he responded, his voice tight with panic. Amanda, what have you done? I just got a call from Philip saying I'm under investigation for misuse of company funds. And my mother left me 7 voicemails, each one more upset than the last. That sounds stressful. I replied. Maybe you should try disconnecting from technology to decompress. Isn't that what camping is all about? Amanda, please, he begged, dropping the pretense. This isn't funny. My entire career could be at risk. You know what isn't funny, Brian? Lying to your wife about going camping when you're actually taking your secretary to a luxury resort in the Dominican Republic. That's not funny at all. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear the calculations running through his mind, trying to determine exactly how much I knew and how I had found out. I can explain, he finally said, his voice shifting to the smooth, persuasive tone he used with difficult clients. This isn't what you think. Natalie and I. Save it, I cut him off. I've seen the photos, Brian. I've read the emails. I know about the secret credit card, the hotel rooms in Boston, all of it. I know this has been going on for at least 8 months. Photos? What photos? The panic in his voice returned, sharper now. Your girlfriend has a very public Facebook profile. She's been posting your romantic Caribbean getaway in real time. You might want to have a conversation with her about discretion. I could hear muffled sounds as Brian presumably confronted Natalie about the social media posts. When he returned to the phone, his strategy had changed. Look, I made a terrible mistake. I know that. But we can work through this. 7 years of marriage shouldn't end like this. I'll come home right away. And we can talk face to face. There's nothing to talk about, I replied. And you won't be coming home. The locks have been changed, the security codes updated. And your belongings are in storage. Unit 247 at Boston Secure Storage on Brookline Avenue. The key is waiting with your divorce papers on your desk at work. You can't do this, he exploded. His conciliatory tone evaporating. That's my house too. Actually, I can. Check your email for communication from my lawyer. Oh, and Brian? Enjoy explaining to everyone why you're suddenly back from camping with a Caribbean tan. I ended the call and blocked his number, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. The confrontation I had dreaded for days had turned out to be empowering rather than devastating. The next morning, I boarded my flight to Maui with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. For 14 days, I experienced Hawaii on my own terms, hiking to waterfalls without rushing, spending entire afternoons reading on the beach. Taking a surfing lesson I had always wanted to try but Brian had dismissed as too touristy. I posted exactly 0 photos on social media, keeping this healing time purely for myself. When I returned to Boston, tanned and refreshed, the reality of my new life was waiting. My lawyer had handled 3 increasingly desperate communications from Brian, who had finally retained his own attorney when he realized I wasn't going to be swayed by emotional appeals. His parents had reached out separately, expressing their continued support for me and their profound disappointment in their son. The most surprising development came from Brian's workplace. Philip Harrington called personally to inform me that their investigation had uncovered multiple instances of financial impropriety beyond what I had presented. Brian had been placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a final decision, but Philip's tone made it clear that termination was the likely outcome. The firm values integrity above all else, Philip explained. And quite frankly, Brian's actions reflect a fundamental lack of judgment that we cannot overlook. I thanked Philip for the update, feeling a complex mix of emotions. I hadn't set out to destroy Brian's career, but I couldn't deny a certain vindication in knowing that his professional reputation was suffering consequences alongside his personal one. As the weeks turned into months, the divorce proceedings moved forward. Brian initially fought against the division of assets I had proposed, but when faced with the evidence of his financial misconduct during the marriage, his position weakened considerably. In the end, we reached a settlement that was more than fair. I kept the proceeds from the house sale, which sold remarkably quickly in the hot market, my retirement accounts, and the investments that had been in my name. Brian kept his personal accounts, his possessions, and the debt he had accumulated on his secret credit card. Through it all, my support network proved invaluable. Jessica and Kyle had me over for dinner weekly, providing normalcy and friendship when I needed it most. My parents, who had always been quietly skeptical of Brian's charm, flew in from Arizona to help me find and furnish a new apartment in a vibrant neighborhood closer to downtown, something I had always wanted but Brian had resisted. Perhaps most surprisingly, Margaret and William, Brian's parents, maintained their relationship with me despite the divorce. We met for lunch monthly, a tradition that had begun during my marriage and continued afterward. They never spoke ill of their son in my presence, but their continued friendship spoke volumes about where their sympathies lay. 6 months after discovering Brian's betrayal, I received an unexpected job offer from a competing marketing firm. The position came with a significant salary increase, creative control over major campaigns, and the opportunity to build my own team. It was exactly the kind of role I had been working toward for years. During the interview process, the firm's CEO had mentioned hearing about me through industry channels. It wasn't until after I accepted the position that I learned Philip Harrington had recommended me. Impressed by my professionalism during a difficult personal situation. In a strange way, Brian's betrayal had opened doors that might have remained closed otherwise. As for Brian himself, mutual acquaintances reported that he and Natalie had broken up shortly after returning from their ill-fated vacation. He had eventually found a new position at a smaller, less prestigious firm, and was renting an apartment in a neighborhood he would have considered beneath him during our marriage. I felt no joy in his downfall, but no sympathy either. He had made his choices, and now he was living with them. On the 1-year anniversary of what I now refer to as the camping trip incident, I hosted a dinner party in my new apartment. Looking around at the faces of friends who had supported me through the darkest period of my life, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass. "Not to the past, or to revenge, or even to justice, but to resilience, to growth, and to the unexpected gifts that sometimes come from our greatest pains." The journey from betrayal to healing hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been days of crushing sadness, moments of rage so intense I could barely breathe, and nights spent questioning every year of my marriage. But there had also been profound discoveries about my own strength, my capacity for forgiveness of myself, if not Brian, and my ability to build a life that was wholly mine. The most important lesson I learned through it all was that losing someone who doesn't truly value you isn't a loss at all. It's the universe creating space for something better. Brian's betrayal hadn't broken me. It had broken me open, allowing me to reconstruct myself with greater wisdom and authenticity. As for what happened to Brian in the end, that's his story to tell. Mine continues to unfold, richer and more genuine than I could have imagined when I was trying to hold together a marriage that existed only in my mind. If you're watching this and going through your own betrayal, remember that the path through pain isn't around it, it's through it. Trust your instincts, gather your evidence, protect yourself legally and financially, and then rebuild with intention. The life waiting on the other side might just be the one you were meant to live all along. What's the most important lesson you've learned from a relationship ending? Share your wisdom in the comments below. And if this story helped you feel less alone in your own journey, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. Thank you for listening to my story.